Hi everybody, welcome to Tathaastu. Today is a very special video. I'm going to talk to you about my favorite actor and possibly someone who's influenced me as a person, and that is the person who's celebrating his 70th birthday today, Dr. Kamal Haasan. Um, it's very difficult to put into words how much Kamal Haasan as a person and as an actor means to me. Primarily because a lot of things that I've learned about in terms of ideology, in terms of being a politiculturist, is something that I get from Mr. Kamal Haasan. Obviously, I don't agree with a lot of things that he does, and I don't disagree with a lot of things that he does. But I think this video is going to be sort of divided between his influence as an artist in the first half, and the second as a person to me. One, as an artist. I think born in the 90s, your exposure to Tamil cinema generally becomes very limited to 90s movies, 2000s, 2020s. So I've sort of seen movies for the past 30, 32 odd years, right? In these 31 odd years, the first thing that I've always noticed is that it's always easy to middle paths and always easy to create middling cinema, because every phase of cinema, which is almost every decade for that matter, has more often than not cinema that is very simplistic, very formula oriented, and isn't something that's willing to push the envelope. But there have been very few people who do that, and one of that is Mr. Kamal Haasan. Before we move on to the kind of movies and the influences that he's had on me, I'd like to thank my parents for me, because they're the ones who made me watch a lot of older Kamal Haasan movies. They made me watch the movies that they watched when he was younger, and when Kamal Haasan was growing from being a child actor to that of being a supporting cast in a lot of Balachandar movies, and then from there moving into becoming an actor and then a star, and then now Ulaganayakan, right? So that's one thing that I thought I'll register here. But coming back to Dr. Kamal Haasan, 65 years he's been in the industry, and he's 70 years old. It's a mammoth task to be a child actor, growing up from a child actor to becoming an artist first, not even an actor. He becomes a dance master, he becomes then assistant director, then he moves on to other facets of cinema before he actually moves into becoming a full-fledged actor in and of itself. So it's weird, not just for me, but even something that Kamal Haasan himself divulges, for him to become an actor. He really didn't want to be an actor. He wanted to be a director, and he wanted to make movies. But fortunately for us, his mentor, Dr. K. Balachandar, was very specific. He was like, Kamal, you're a great actor. I think you should be a good actor as well. I think by the end of the 80s, you're in a position where you can see Kamal sort of moving past visions of other directors to actually starting to work with directors whose visions, who can sort of mold themselves into his vision. For example, Tevar Magan. Tevar Magan was written by Kamal Haasan but directed by Bharathan, one of the best directors of Malayalam cinema. You can see that Kamal Haasan in the 90s has moved on from now becoming an actor who has to choose his scripts from others to rather now becoming in a position where he can demand scripts. And that is where I think Kamal Haasan becomes and sort of moves into the next level, right? Obviously, we can talk about Nayaga, and obviously, we can talk about all of the other great movies he did before the 90s, sorry. But post the 90s is when I see Kamal Haasan actually having a voice for himself, right? And you can see that voice. It's a call to action, not just for him being more politically and socially conscious, but also to sort of be more versatile about the art itself, right? A very good example, Virumandi. A movie that could have just been very simply about the cons and the discussion around death penalty becomes a work of art primarily because of his reading and his understanding and his vision of how we can use the Rashomon effect. It's impossible for a director right now to be able to do that even now in a position because of market forces, because the kind of money that's involved, because the kind of, let's say, finances and the kind of audiences that we are. But Kamal never really cared about it. Kamal sir honestly never really thought about the audience as someone who he needed to please, but rather he always wanted to be in a position where he himself thought of himself as the audience. And when he was the audience, everything was a go. Every piece of art could be acceptable to the audience. And that would mean that we as the audience are forced to start thinking about things. And that's the great aspect of cinema, right? So when you look at the growth of cinema, all the way from silent movies to say Fellini to a lot of the great directors that have come in from the West to ourselves in terms of cinema that comes in from the 50s to the 60s, his influence from Hindi cinema, especially the amount of times that he's talked about Sholay, you can see the impact of the growth of cinema in the growth of Dr. Kamal Haasan. And that is the most interesting part about being Dr. Kamal Haasan, right? And it's not just him trying to infuse socio-cultural ideas into very dramatic or very drama-oriented films. They're in his comedies. They're in his comedies with regard to how he talks about feminism in a movie like Sadi Leelavati. It's an amazing piece of literature as to how he talks about things like adultery, not in a taboo format, but in a format that is more understandable to people. He talks about how women can be of different variations in terms of their lives and the kind of exposure they've had in Michael Mandana Kamarajan, in terms of the way the four heroines are characterized. He talks about Abhinami in Virumandi, where she's a very headstrong woman. Kamal Haasan, in and of himself, is not just a person who sort of tries to push different ideologies, but also is a person who sort of pushes art to make sure that ideology is perpetrated well. And art, and especially cinema, is a very difficult medium because a simple look could go wrong. A simple nuance in terms of how you portray a character could go wrong. And for him, that is perfection. And that's the reason why most people who work with Kamal Haasan, or most people who say they want to work with Kamal Haasan, or the industry talk of how Kamal Haasan is seen, is always that of a perfectionist, is always that of a person who's looking to do the minutest details and therefore is a pain. But that's not true, right? For a person who cares so deeply about cinema and the way portrayal is in cinema, it is required of him to be more and more careful in the way he portrays his characters. Which is why it probably takes more time, which is why it probably takes more time for him to even select props for movies, right? And that's the difference between a Kamal Haasan and possibly other directors and other actors, right? This isn't a video for me telling you about how Kamal Haasan is the greatest of all time. For me, he is. Probably not for others, right? But for me, why Kamal Haasan is also the greatest is because of him as a person, right? What transcends his art is the human outside it. And the fact that he spends his time talking about his movies, not just from a perspective of it being an art, of him being a cinema person, but also talks about the social context of those movies, makes him a very important personality in terms of dealing with socio-political context. That's the difference between an artist who just believes his work is dedicated to the arts versus a person who moves forward and makes it his life mission to perpetrate social change through art. There's a reason why a large chunk of cinema directors right now fall back and say that their favorite movies or their most inspiring artist would probably be Kamal Haasan, right? And the reason why that is the case is because Kamal Haasan not just was the person who gave platforms to difficult topics, but also made movies well, right? So for people like Vetrimaran, for people like Paranjit, for people like Mari Selvaraj, all of these wonderful directors who've come up recently, I can proudly say that they possibly have had their impact in Kamal Haasan movies. And this is probably the socio-political context and socio-political filmmakers. But filmmakers who don't make those kind of movies but rather want to make great cinema also find that from Kamal Haasan. Mishkin, Ram, all of these people who make really great movies also have their influences from Kamal Haasan. Mishkin talks like in great detail about how after watching Mahanadi, the man had to walk home for 20 kilometers because he had to watch that movie and he was just so disturbed, right? Kamal Hassan isn't the enigma that we want. Because Kamal Hassan is an enigma that we needed and we should continue to need. He isn't the hero that we deserve because the heroes we deserve are the people who generally entertain us. But he's the hero we need right now because he's 70. He's the guy who's pushing a lot of good cinema forward, bar Indian 2 to some extent. Honestly, didn't like that movie at all. But for a man who has done such diverse set of roles, has moved on from being a director's actor to becoming a director to becoming an actor with a director's vision, it takes a lot of effort for him to, for the treasure trove of knowledge that he has. I think the man could have been somewhere else if he was possibly in the West or anything of that sort. But that's something that we just call wishful thinking. But honestly, I'd rather just have him in Tamil cinema because the man is a force to reckon with. And that is the reason why Kamal Hassan is the greatest, according to me. Thank you very much, Kamal sir. Thank you for the impact that you've had in our lives and have a great 70th. We hope to see you in more cinema and in more talks with regard to how you shape people's lives as well. Thank you. Cheers. Subscribe, like to the video, and we'll catch up with you in the next video. Cheers. Bye-bye.